the ashes that burned back. The stars didn't care about justice. They burned cold and distant over the ruins of Harrow's End, where 7 human colonies had once thrived. Now only silence answered the void. The ash rain had come 3 years ago, a bioweapon that turned skin to dust and bones to powder. The alien Kresh Empire called it pest control. They broadcast the deaths across 100 worlds as a warning. Earth never answered. No fleets came. No rescue ships broke through the dark. The colonies were written off, their names erased from star charts like they'd never existed at all. But the Kresh made one mistake. They didn't kill everyone. Deep in the wreckage of Outpost Meridian, a mining ship called the Dreadlight drifted through debris fields, its hull scarred by fire and time. Inside, 3 survivors nursed wounds that would never heal, not the ones carved into flesh, but the ones burned into the soul. The pilot went by, the Ghost, now. His real name died with his family. He moved through the ship like smoke, his eyes hollow but sharp, watching scanners that flickered with dying power. His hands, once steady enough to guide supply runs through asteroid belts, now shook unless they were gripping a weapon. In the engine room, Toma cursed at failing systems with the fury of a man who'd lost his faith in everything but momentum. He was older, gray-haired and thick-armed, with burns that crawled up his neck from the day he dragged survivors from a burning habdome. He didn't talk much anymore. Didn't need to. His work spoke loud enough, and then there was Steel. She earned the name in blood. Silent, efficient, and cold as the void itself. She'd been a medic once. She'd tried to save people with gentle hands and soft words. The Kresh taught her a different language. Now her hands moved with surgical precision, but the only cuts she made were the kind that ended things. They were the last of Harrow's End. 3 ghosts, haunting a dying ship, nursing a hatred too big to bury. Contact, Ghost said quietly, his voice like gravel scraping metal. Kresh patrol. 2 cruisers, heading toward the relay station. Toma looked up from the guts of a repurposed missile launcher, grease smeared across his cheek. The relay? Ghost nodded. The one that coordinates their hunter packs. The one they used to call in the strike teams after the rain. Steel stepped forward, her boots silent on the deck. Her eyes, once brown and warm, were now flat and unreadable. Then we kill it. Toma let out a long breath. We're 1 ship, barely armed. If we go after that relay, every Kresh Warhawk in 3 systems will come down on us. Good, Steel said. Let them come. Ghost turned from the scanner, his scarred face half lit by dying console lights. We're dead anyway, Toma. We died with the colonies. But before we go, he looked at the relay's coordinates burning on the screen. We make them remember our names. Toma stared at them both. Then he smiled, a grim, broken thing. All right then. He cracked his knuckles. Let's make some noise. The Dreadlight moved like a predator through the black, engines running cold to avoid detection. They approached the relay station, a massive structure bristling with antennas and defense grids orbiting a dead moon. Kresh ships moved in lazy patterns around it, arrogant in their security. They didn't expect prey to bite back. Ghost's hands were steady now. Toma, I need those missiles hot. Already there. Toma's voice crackled over the comms. She'll fire dirty, but she'll fire. Steel, boarding charges ready? Affirmative, the plan was simple. Suicidal, but simple. They'd punch through the defense grid with everything they had, latch onto the relay's outer hull and plant charges deep in its core. If they moved fast enough, if they were lucky enough, they'd make it out before the whole thing went up. If not, well, the void took everyone eventually. 15 seconds, Ghost said. His finger hovered over the throttle. No turning back. Steele's voice came through, cold and certain. There was never a way back. Ghost smiled, his first real smile in 3 years. Then let's start a war. He slammed the throttle forward. The Dreadlight screamed out of the dark like a comet of rage. Alarms shrieked across the Kresh station. Defense turrets swiveled, spitting fire into the void. Ghost twisted the ship through the hail of plasma, the hull groaning under the strain. Missiles away, Toma roared. The old mining ship shuddered as makeshift warheads launched, crude, brutal, and angry. They tore through 2 defense towers, ripping metal and circuitry into clouds of shrapnel. A Kresh cruiser turned to intercept, but Ghost was already past it, driving the ship toward the relay's central spine like a knife toward a heart. Brace, he shouted. The Dreadlight slammed into the relay with bone-rattling force. Magnetic clamps fired, locking them in place. Steel was already moving, helmet sealed, charges strapped across her back. She blew the airlock and dropped into the relay's interior, where corridors twisted like veins through a dying beast. Kresh soldiers scrambled to respond, but Steele moved through them like a surgical strike, fast, efficient, merciless. Each movement was economical. Each shot found its mark. She didn't hate them anymore. Hate required emotion. This was just work. She planted the charges in the reactor core, her hands moving on instinct. The timer glowed red. 2 minutes. Charges set, she said into the comms. Get us out. But Ghost's voice came back tight. We've got company. Big company. 3 Kresh warships had broken from patrol, closing fast. Their weapons charged, painting the dread light with targeting lasers. Toma's laugh was wild over the comms. Guess we're famous now. Ghost fired the engines. The clamps released. The dread light tore away from the relay, just as the first volley of plasma hammered into the station's shields. Steele pulled herself through the airlock, sealing it behind her as the ship twisted and dove through enemy fire. 90 seconds, she called out. Ghost pushed the dying ship harder than it had ever been pushed. Alarms screamed. Hull plates buckled, but he didn't slow down. Not now. Not ever again. 60 seconds. The Kresh warships pursued, hungry and furious. But they were too close to the relay, too confident in their prey's defeat. 30 seconds. Ghost pulled the ship into a hard burn, engines flaring white-hot. Behind them, the relay station trembled, then erupted. Fire bloomed across the void like a newborn star, consuming the station and 2 of the Kresh warships in a wave of nuclear fury. The shock wave caught the dread light and hurled it forward, shaking the crew like dice in a cup. Sparks flew. Systems failed. But they were alive, and the galaxy had just learned something new. Humanity wasn't dead. It was angry. The legend that refused to die. The explosion echoed across a dozen star systems. Not the blast itself, though that was visible for light years, but the message it carried. The Kresh relay station had been the nerve center for 3 sectors of occupied space. Its destruction didn't just cripple communications. It severed the arrogance that had kept the Empire untouchable. Someone had struck back. Someone had made them bleed. Within days, the whispers began. In slave pens and prison barges in the dark corners of occupied worlds, a name took root like fire in dry grass. The Revenants. Humans who refused to stay dead. Ghosts who turned grief into weapons and loss into fury. The Kresh High Command dismissed it as propaganda. A lucky strike by desperate survivors, nothing more. They sent hunter packs to sweep the debris fields, to find the wreckage of that mining ship in silence. The story before it could spread, they found nothing. The dreadlight had vanished into the black like smoke, but the Revenants were just getting started. 2 months after the relay bombing, Ghost stood in the cargo hold of their ship, staring at a wall covered in photographs. Faces stared back at him, men, women, children, the dead of Harrow's End, the names the galaxy tried to forget. We're down to 17% fuel, Toma said from the doorway, his voice rough with exhaustion. Life support's holding, but barely. And we've got maybe 3 more strikes before this rust bucket falls apart completely. Ghost didn't turn around. Then we make them count. Steele entered behind Toma, carrying a datapad scavenged from a Kresh supply depot they'd hit the week before. Her expression was unreadable as always, but there was something different in her eyes now. Not warmth, she'd buried that with her patience, but purpose. Found something, she said, handing Ghost the pad. A research station, edge of Kresh space. They're developing a new strain of the bioweapon, the one they used on us. Ghost's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the datapad so hard it cracked. They're making more of it. Not just making it, Steele continued, her voice flat. Testing it. On prisoners. Human prisoners. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Toma's hands curled into fists. Ghost's breathing went shallow and controlled, the way it did before violence. How many prisoners? He asked quietly. Intel says 200. Maybe more. Steele paused. Most of them are from the outer colonies. Survivors they rounded up after the massacres. Ghost looked back at the wall of faces, at the children who'd never grow old, at the families who'd trusted Earth to protect them, at the silence that answered their screams. We're going in, he said. Toma didn't argue. He just nodded. I'll prep the charges. Steele's expression didn't change, but her voice carried a weight it hadn't before. If we do this, if we hit a research station, The creche won't just send hunter packs anymore. They'll send everything. Ghost finally turned to face them both. His scarred face was half shadow in the dim light, but his eyes burned with something beyond rage. Something colder. Something patient. Good, he said. Let them send everything. Let them know that humanity doesn't surrender. We don't beg, and we sure as hell don't forget. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a razor's edge. They wanted to erase us from the stars. Instead, we're going to become the nightmare they can't wake up from. Steele's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Then let's go wake them up. The research station orbited a toxic gas giant hidden in the planet's radiation shadow. It was a fortress, shielded, armed, and staffed by some of the Creche Empire's best soldiers and scientists. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. The dread light came in dark and silent, using the gas giant's magnetic storms to mask their approach. Ghost navigated through radiation bands that would have killed a civilian crew. His hands steady on controls held together by Toma's genius and sheer willpower. 2 minutes to breach point, Ghost said. Steele was already suited up, standing in the airlock with a dozen other survivors they'd picked up along the way. Freed prisoners, escaped slaves, other ghosts hungry for revenge. Each one carried scavenged weapons and makeshift armor. They weren't soldiers, not anymore. They were something worse. Remember, Steele said to the assembled team, her voice cutting through the comms like a blade. Prisoners first. Data second. If you see scientists, they answer questions or they don't leave. Your choice. A young woman, barely 20, with burn scars covering half her face, checked her rifle. What about the guards? Steele's response was immediate and cold. No prisoners, no mercy. They chose their side. The team nodded. No one questioned it. They'd all lost too much to pretend morality still mattered. Ghost brought the ship alongside the station's docking port. Alarms began to wail. The Creche had finally detected them. But it was too late. Breach! Ghost shouted. Toma triggered the shaped charges. The station's hull buckled and tore. Air screamed out into the void, and the revenants poured in like a flood of vengeance. The Creche fought back hard. Their soldiers were trained, disciplined, and well-armed. But they'd never faced an enemy that didn't care about survival. The revenants moved with terrifying efficiency, each one willing to die if it meant taking 2 enemies with them. Steele led from the front, her movements economical and lethal. She dropped 3 guards before they could raise their weapons, then moved deeper into the facility. Behind her, the freed prisoners fought with the fury of people who'd been caged too long. Detention block, level 3, someone shouted over the comms. Steele changed direction, sprinting through corridors slick with blood and smoke. She found the cells. Reinforced doors holding families and soldiers and children who'd survived the initial massacres only to become test subjects. Stand back, she ordered. She planted a charge on the main lock and blew it. The doors hissed open, revealing faces hollow with despair and hunger. But when they saw Steele, when they saw the insignia she'd painted on her armor, a broken star rising from ashes, their eyes changed. Hope was a dangerous thing. Can you walk? Steele asked a man with missing fingers and haunted eyes. He nodded. If it means getting out of here, I'll fly. Good. Get to the docking bay. Tell them Ghost sent you. Move. The prisoners scattered, some helping those too weak to run. Steele turned to find Toma's voice crackling through the comms. Got the data. It's worse than we thought. They're planning to deploy the weapon on 12 more colonies. Mass extinction scale. Ghost's voice came back, tight with controlled rage. Then we make sure this data goes everywhere. Every newsfeed, every independent system, every species that thinks the Creche are civilized. We show them what monsters look like. Copy that, Toma said. But we've got a problem. They've locked down the reactor. We can't scuttle the station without— I'll handle it, Ghost interrupted. Get everyone to the ship. That's an order. Steele knew that tone. Ghost, don't— Someone has to stay behind to trigger the overload manually. You know that. His voice was calm now, almost peaceful. Get them out, Steele. Get them home. Tell them we didn't die for nothing. There is no home, Steele said quietly. Then make one, Ghost answered. Make a place where humanity remembers how to fight back. Where we don't wait for someone else to save us. Where we save ourselves. For the first time in 3 years, Steele's voice cracked. Just slightly. You're really going to make me do this alone? Ghost laughed, a real laugh, warm and human. You were never alone. None of us were. That's the whole point. The comms went quiet for a moment. Then Steele nodded, even though he couldn't see her. See you on the other side, Ghost. Save me a drink." Steele turned and ran, shepherding the last of the prisoners toward the docking bay. Behind her, deep in the station's core, Ghost worked the reactor controls with hands that had guided survivors through the dark for 3 long years. The Kresh soldiers finally broke through to the reactor room, weapons raised. Ghost didn't even reach for his gun. He just smiled at them, that broken, scarred smile, and triggered the overload. "For Harrow's End," he said. The research station detonated like a second sun, consuming itself and 3 Kresh warships that had moved in to recapture it. The shockwave rippled across the system, visible from a dozen worlds, and the dread light, battered and barely holding together, limped away into the black with 200 freed prisoners and enough evidence to shake the galaxy's conscience. 6 months later, the name Revenant had become legend. Independent systems rallied. Other survivor groups emerged from hiding, inspired by impossible victories. The Kresh Empire still held power, but their grip was slipping. Fear had a new face, and it looked human. In a refugee station on the edge of civilized space, Steele stood before a crowd of survivors, rescued prisoners and volunteers who'd heard the call. Toma stood beside her, older and grayer, but still standing. "They think we're dead," Steele said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "They think one good massacre will make us disappear. But we're still here, and we're not just surviving anymore." She raised her fist, and 200 others rose with her. "We're fighting back, for every colony they burned, for every name they tried to erase, for Ghost, and everyone who died believing someone would remember them." The crowd roared, a sound that echoed through the station's hull and out into the void beyond. "We are the Revenants," Steele said, her voice like iron. "We are humanity's memory, its fury, and we will not stop until every star knows our name, and every enemy learns the price of starting a war with the human race." The cheers shook the station, and somewhere in the black, where the stars burned cold and distant, the ghost of a scarred pilot smiled. The war wasn't over. But now, humanity remembered how to fight.